White heavy checkmark disclaimer. The story is a fictionalized dramatization inspired by real-life rumors, fan accounts, and reported spiritual experiences tied to the legacy of legendary actress Elizabeth Taylor. While it draws on public knowledge about Taylor's life, estate, and personality, all supernatural elements are products of creative storytelling. This narrative is intended purely for entertainment purposes and does not claim to represent factual events. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, beyond Elizabeth Taylor's public persona, is purely coincidental. Elizabeth Taylor was more than just a Hollywood actress. She was an icon carved into the very foundation of film history. With striking violet eyes, a magnetic presence, and an extraordinary personal life that drew as much attention as her movies, she became a symbol of glamour and timeless beauty. From Cleopatra to Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, Elizabeth dominated the silver screen for over 6 decades, earning 2 Academy Awards and millions of devoted fans. Yet behind the dazzling fame and flashing cameras, there was a private woman, one who believed deeply in energy, the spiritual world, and the unseen forces that hovered just outside the physical realm. She wasn't shy about her fascination with the metaphysical. Close friends claimed she often visited mediums and kept protective crystals in her home. Some even recalled that she spoke of feeling her late husband Mike Todd's presence long after his tragic death. She collected antique jewelry not just for its beauty, but for its energy, and was rumored to have worn certain stones to ward off negativity. Though she lived in the public eye, she preserved rooms in her home that were off-limits, quiet sanctuaries filled with incense, photographs of her past, and tokens she never explained to anyone. When Elizabeth passed away in 2011, she left behind not only a cinematic legacy, but a physical one as well, an estate nestled in Bel Air, California. The property was elegant, surrounded by manicured gardens, marble floors, and quiet halls that whispered with decades of memories. After her death, the estate was preserved for years, untouched by developers or tourists, almost as though time itself had respectfully paused within its gates. It wasn't until much later that it was quietly sold to a Hollywood producer, a man known for his love of old Hollywood and his interest in restoring historical properties. But with that sale came a curious wave of stories, contractors complaining of cold drafts in sealed rooms, gardeners who refused to enter the Rose courtyard after dark, and maintenance staff hearing soft footsteps in the upstairs hallway when no one was around. Rumors swirled, most written off as superstition or imagination. But some, especially those who knew Elizabeth personally, began to wonder, had the spirit of Elizabeth Taylor truly left the mansion? Or had something sacred and unresolved tied her to the place she once called home? Even after her passing, certain details emerged that sparked curiosity among paranormal enthusiasts. For instance, several of her most prized possessions, including a rare violet sapphire ring, were never officially accounted for. There were also whispered mentions of a hidden room beneath the estate, an alleged vault of personal writings, memorabilia, and perhaps even pieces of her soul. While no concrete proof ever surfaced, the intrigue deepened when more than one guest reported smelling her signature perfume, Bal au Versailles, suddenly and inexplicably while walking through the home. This is where our story begins, with a home rich in history, a presence too strong to be forgotten, and a spirit that may have never moved on. Whether the events that followed were purely psychological, driven by obsession and grief, or whether they were truly supernatural, one thing remains certain: Elizabeth Taylor's presence, charming, commanding, and eternal, refused to be buried. For the new owner, what began as a dream purchase soon unraveled into something far more complex and chilling. He thought he had bought a mansion, but what he inherited was a legend. The house was everything he had imagined and more. Situated in the heart of Bel Air, with towering iron gates and palm-lined driveways, the mansion stood like a sleeping giant of old Hollywood grandeur. The man who had purchased it, Ethan Hale, was no stranger to opulence. A successful Hollywood producer in his early 40s, He had built his empire on rebooting classic films, and he had always been enamored by the golden age of cinema. When he learned that Elizabeth Taylor's former estate had quietly entered the market, he moved faster than any other bidder. To him, it wasn't just a home. It was a piece of history. Owning it felt like being part of a legacy. From the moment he stepped inside, Ethan felt the weight of the house's character. The marble floors gleamed beneath the towering ceilings, and sunlight filtered in through stained glass panels, casting colorful streaks across the vintage furnishings that had remained untouched. Some rooms were still decorated in Elizabeth style: velvet drapes, antique mirrors, crystal chandeliers. It was as if time had been paused the moment she left. Ethan felt a sense of reverence, almost like he was intruding on sacred ground, but the thrill of living within such a space overrode his hesitation. The first few nights passed without incident. Ethan walked the halls slowly, familiarizing himself with the layout, noting old photos left behind, some of Elizabeth with Richard Burton, others from movie sets. He felt both awe and curiosity. But it wasn't long before the house began to show its other side. It started with something small, a lingering scent. Late one evening, while reading in the library, Ethan caught a faint aroma, floral, powdery, unmistakably feminine. He assumed it came from one of the many preserved cushions or curtains, a fragrance trapped in the fabric. But then it happened again the next night, and again the one after that, each time stronger, more defined. It followed him to different rooms. He looked up the scent, Bal au Versailles, and found it had been Elizabeth Taylor's favorite perfume. Next came the cold spots. Despite California's summer heat, certain areas of the house, particularly the east corridor near the master bedroom, remained icy, no matter how high the thermostat was turned. The HVAC professionals he called found nothing wrong. "Old houses settle," one of them said. But the air in that hallway didn't just feel cold, it felt charged, like something unseen was stirring nearby. Then, furniture began to shift. Subtle at first, a chair not quite where he remembered placing it, a pillow turned the wrong way, but Ethan chalked it up to forgetfulness. That excuse crumbled when he came downstairs one morning to find a set of vintage teacups arranged perfectly on the kitchen counter. He didn't own teacups. They had been locked away in a china cabinet he hadn't opened yet. The cabinet, upon inspection, was now ajar. At this point, Ethan's fascination with the paranormal, something he had always found amusing in ghost documentaries, began to shift into real concern. He started keeping a journal of the events. Dates, times, temperatures, feelings. What unsettled him most wasn't the activity itself, it was how personal it felt. Whatever was happening didn't seem random. It felt deliberate. Observing. Reacting. One evening, while exploring the attic, he stumbled upon something hidden behind a wooden panel in the wall. A small hollow space, perfectly square, and within it a leather-bound book wrapped in silk cloth. The pages were yellowed and smelled of age. At first, he thought it might be an old script or personal notes. But as he read through it, he realized it was a journal. No name on the cover, but the handwriting was elegant and emotional. The entries mentioned love, grief, and longing, and referenced people from Elizabeth Taylor's life. The more Ethan read, the more convinced he became that it was Elizabeth's, or at least written by someone deeply close to her. The entries became more cryptic as they went on, referencing a piece of jewelry, a violet guardian, and a final request that had never been fulfilled. Ethan closed the book, a chill crawling up his spine. That night, as he stood in front of a tall mirror in the upstairs hallway, he saw her. A figure, faint and delicate, dressed in a flowing gown, standing just behind his shoulder. Her features were soft, and her eyes shimmered like amethysts. As he spun around, she vanished, leaving only the scent of roses and a whisper that echoed in the corners of the room. Not yet. Ethan realized then that this house was never truly his. It still belonged to her, and she had something to say. The vision in the hallway mirror refused to leave Ethan's mind. Though the figure had vanished as quickly as she appeared, her presence clung to the air like a soft breath held just under the surface. He tried to rationalize it: stress, sleep deprivation, the power of suggestion, but deep down, Ethan knew what he had seen. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't his imagination. It was her. For the next several days, Ethan found himself unusually cautious, as if the walls themselves were listening. He moved slower through the house, his footsteps echoing too loudly, the silence between rooms pressing on him like a dense fog. That same hallway where he saw the apparition became nearly impossible to walk through without a chill crawling down his spine. He tried to avoid it, but somehow, no matter where he went, it seemed to draw him back. Then came the second incident, this one even more undeniable. It was late at night, sometime past 2 a.m., when Ethan was awoken by soft, rhythmic knocking. It wasn't aggressive, more like a gentle tap on an old wooden surface. Still half asleep, he followed the sound to the sitting room near the back of the house. The fireplace had gone cold, but a faint glow flickered on the mantel. There, above the hearth, was a framed photograph, one he hadn't noticed before. It was a black-and-white portrait of Elizabeth Taylor, her gaze intense, her lips frozen in a slight smile. The glow came not from the photo itself, but from a candle that had somehow lit itself beside it. Ethan never lit candles, he preferred modern LED lights. This one hadn't been used in years, judging by its cracked wax. Yet here it was, burning steadily. As he approached, the air turned colder. He reached out to touch the frame, and a shock, sharp and electric, snapped through his fingers. The flame vanished. Ethan spent the rest of the night in his study, unable to sleep. The diary he had found remained beside him, unopened since the night he first discovered it. But now, drawn by the eerie events, he felt compelled to read more. Carefully, he turned the pages, his eyes scanning entries filled with grief, love, and cryptic references to the unfinished, the missing, and Violet's secrets. One passage stood out: "If I am to be remembered, let it be not just for beauty or fame. Let it be for the love I could not bury, for the ring I never reclaimed, and the vow that echoes even now." The reference to a ring made Ethan pause. He had heard stories about Elizabeth's famous jewelry collection, particularly her love for rare violet and lavender stones. One piece, in particular, a violet sapphire ring, was rumored to have gone missing during her final years. Some believed it was buried with her. Others claimed it had been stolen. But what if it had never left the house? The next morning, determined to explore further, Ethan returned to the attic. He searched around the hollow wall where he had found the diary and began tapping on adjacent panels. His knuckles eventually struck one that echoed differently. With some effort, he pried it loose and discovered a small compartment. Inside was an antique, velvet jewelry box, dust-covered and fragile. He opened it slowly. There it was. A stunning violet sapphire ring, glittering in the dim light. The stone pulsed with color, and the gold setting was engraved with a small phrase, "To my eternal." Ethan felt the air change, thicker, heavier, yet somehow gentler. He didn't know how to explain it, but holding that ring felt like holding a heartbeat frozen in time. That night, the most powerful encounter happened. As Ethan walked past the hallway mirror again, he saw the same figure. But this time, she didn't vanish. She stood fully formed, her face calm, her gown flowing like mist. Her violet eyes met his. She lifted her hand, not in warning, but in gratitude. Her lips parted, and a soft voice filled the air, barely above a whisper. "You found it." Ethan couldn't move, couldn't speak, could only watch as she slowly stepped back into the shadows, her form dissolving like fog under morning light. The mirror went still. He stood there long after she was gone, the ring still warm in his hand. And in that moment, he realized this haunting wasn't one of malice or anger. It was one of longing, of a story unfinished, of a presence that had waited years for someone to listen. And he had listened. After the second appearance of the figure, undoubtedly Elizabeth Taylor, Ethan's sense of reality began to unravel. What had once been a simple restoration project had transformed into something far deeper, more spiritual, and frighteningly personal. He had always admired Elizabeth as an icon, but now he felt tied to her, bound by the weight of a request he didn't fully understand, and a haunting that was far from over. The next several days brought a surge of paranormal activity, enough to shatter any doubt Ethan might have had about the truth of what was happening. It began with the mirrors. Every reflective surface in the house, from the bathroom sink to the framed photos along the hallway, started to act strangely. At first, it was subtle, slight distortions in his reflection, as if someone else were standing just behind him. Then came foggy imprints, delicate handprints appearing on the glass when no one had touched them. One morning, Ethan awoke to find a message written in the steamed mirror, "Still waiting." Then came the television. Ethan hadn't touched it for days, but one night, as he entered the living room, the screen flickered to life by itself. There was no signal, just static, but within the static were flashes. Quick bursts of images, Elizabeth Taylor on the set of Cleopatra, laughing behind the scenes, close-ups of her violet eyes. Then her voice, distant and layered, echoed through the speakers. "Home isn't where the walls are. It's where the heart remains." The screen went dark. By now, Ethan had stopped questioning. His fear had evolved into intrigue. He began documenting everything: video recordings, audio clips, photographs. He reached out to a local paranormal investigator known for his work with celebrity hauntings. The man agreed to meet, but warned Ethan over the phone, "If it's Elizabeth, she won't come out for cameras. You have to give her what she wants. She's not stuck, she's choosing to stay." Even stranger was the recurring presence of a white Persian cat. It appeared first in the rose garden, perched on a stone bench that Elizabeth had once called her favorite thinking spot. Ethan had no pets and no neighbors nearby, but the cat seemed perfectly at home, slinking through rooms as though it had lived there for years. Once, Ethan followed it down the hallway, only for it to vanish completely when it turned a corner. He remembered reading that Elizabeth had adored her Persian cats. Perhaps this was a spiritual echo, or something she had drawn back with her presence. The most unsettling moment came one rainy evening. Ethan had left the violet sapphire ring in the study, placed atop the old diary as a sign of respect. Around midnight, thunder rolled through the hills of Bel Air, and lightning illuminated the windows. As Ethan stood in the hallway, he heard the piano in the main parlor, soft notes being played. He hadn't touched the piano since he moved in. Heart racing, he moved slowly toward the sound. The melody was faint but familiar, "Send in the Clowns," a song known to be one of Elizabeth's favorites. When he entered the parlor, the music stopped. The room was empty. But something had changed. On the piano's glossy surface lay a handwritten note in the same elegant script as the diary. "Not every treasure belongs to the living. Return what is mine, and peace shall follow." The message was unmistakable. She wanted the ring returned, not kept, not admired, but brought somewhere specific. But where? Ethan flipped through the diary again, searching for clues. One phrase kept repeating: "the lavender resting place." He had no idea what it meant. A metaphor? A physical location? In the days that followed, activity reached a fever pitch. Lights flickered violently. Doors opened on their own. He awoke with the scent of fresh roses saturating the room. The white cat meowed outside his bedroom each night, then disappeared into the hallway. Staff refused to return after experiencing flickering shadows and cold gusts that moved against them like invisible hands. Ethan realized the house was reaching its breaking point. The longer he held onto the ring, the more agitated her spirit became. She wasn't trying to frighten him, she was pleading. But even pleas from the dead can grow desperate when unanswered. He stood in the center of the hallway one night, holding the ring, staring into the mirror where she first appeared. The air pulsed. The perfume returned. Her voice, soft and sorrowful, whispered again, "Find my resting place, or I will never rest." By this point, Ethan Hale was no longer in control. The estate had shifted from a glamorous monument to a living, breathing presence that demanded constant attention. The violet sapphire ring had become the center of it all, beautiful and cursed, glowing with meaning he didn't fully understand. Sleep escaped him, and isolation crept in. Every room whispered. Every breeze carried her perfume. Elizabeth Taylor's spirit was no longer simply lingering, it was active. It wanted something. With no other options left, Ethan reached out to a well-known Hollywood medium named Cassandra Rhine. She was infamous in celebrity circles, reclusive, enigmatic, and rumored to have communicated with the spirits of Marilyn Monroe, Judy Garland, and even James Dean. Ethan had his doubts, but desperation overruled skepticism. Cassandra agreed to visit the mansion on the condition that she would not be filmed or interviewed. "This isn't for a show," she said. "This is real, and you need to respect her." Cassandra arrived one overcast afternoon, dressed in flowing black with a violet amulet hanging around her neck. Her eyes scanned the property with quiet reverence. As soon as she stepped into the entryway, she paused and inhaled deeply. "She's still here," Cassandra murmured. "And she's stronger than I expected." Ethan led her through the mansion, pointing out the hallway mirror, the attic, the parlor piano, and the sitting room. Cassandra listened, but didn't speak much. She touched certain surfaces, occasionally closing her eyes to absorb the energy. At the rose courtyard, she whispered, this was her sanctuary. She spoke to the stars here. When they finally entered the study, the location of the ring and the diary, Cassandra stopped completely. Her entire demeanor changed. She sat down slowly, almost reverently, and placed her hand over the diary and the ring. "She's been trying to communicate through these objects," she said softly. "But you've only heard part of her message." Ethan explained the sightings, the music, the mirrors, and the white Persian cat. Cassandra nodded. "She's bound to this place. Not because she wants to haunt it, but because she can't rest until a part of her soul is reunited with what was lost. That ring, it was a gift. A promise. A piece of her heart. She wanted to be buried with it. But it was misplaced, forgotten, or stolen. And now she's incomplete." At Ethan's request, Cassandra agreed to perform a séance in the parlor, the very room where the piano had played Send in the Clowns by itself. She insisted it be done alone, just the two of them, with no distractions. Candles were lit, the lights dimmed, and the ring was placed in the center of a circular table between them. Cassandra closed her eyes, her voice dropping into a trance-like whisper. She called out into the void. "Elizabeth, we invite you to speak. You're seen. You're heard. What do you need?" At first, there was silence. Then the air shifted. The room darkened, though the candles burned taller. Ethan could feel the temperature drop, and the hair on his arms stood up. Cassandra's breathing changed, and when she next spoke, it was not her voice. "Why did they forget me?" The voice said, soft, elegant, tinged with sadness. "It wasn't the diamonds, it was the vow. He promised it would go with me. I waited. I waited." Ethan leaned forward, his voice trembling. "Where do you want it to go?" There was a pause. Then a single phrase filled the room, spoken as if from everywhere and nowhere at once. "The lavender resting place." Cassandra gasped, her body lurching as the spirit seemed to release its grip. She collapsed back in her chair, her face pale with exhaustion. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. When she recovered, Cassandra explained that Elizabeth had chosen her words carefully. "She's pointing you toward a place, not a literal grave, but somewhere symbolic. Somewhere sacred to her, where lavender bloomed, where she felt peace. You need to find it. You'll know it when you stand in it. Take the ring there, and she'll find her way home." Before leaving, Cassandra gave Ethan one final warning. "If you delay, the unrest will grow. She's patient, but spirits that linger too long, they change." That night, Ethan stood in the courtyard, the diary in one hand and the ring in the other. The white cat sat beside him, staring into the darkened sky. Somewhere out there was the answer, Elizabeth Taylor's final request, waiting to be fulfilled. And he had made a vow of his own, to bring her peace. The lavender resting place. The phrase echoed in Ethan's mind with relentless persistence. Every night he turned it over like a riddle, revisiting the journal, pacing through the mansion's shadowy corridors, hoping something would click. But the answer remained elusive. What he did know was that time was running out. The spirit of Elizabeth Taylor, once serene and graceful, was growing increasingly agitated. The once comforting scent of roses had turned bitter and sharp. The mirrors no longer reflected his face properly. His dreams were haunted by violet eyes watching him through a fog of grief and longing. It was during one of these sleepless nights that Ethan remembered something odd the contractor had mentioned months ago during renovations. A section of the basement blueprints didn't match the current floor plan. At the time, it had seemed like a harmless architectural quirk. Older houses often had extensions or sealed rooms. But now he wondered if that discrepancy held the answer. Armed with a flashlight and his nerves on edge, Ethan descended into the mansion's massive basement. Dusty storage boxes, covered furniture, and remnants of old Hollywood glamour surrounded him. It was like stepping into a forgotten museum. But he wasn't here for nostalgia. He wanted the truth. He used a stud finder along the farthest concrete wall and eventually located a hollow section. His heart thumped faster. The bricks looked uneven, patched over at some point in the past. With a crowbar and hammer, Ethan began carefully dismantling the wall. The concrete crumbled faster than expected, revealing a narrow iron door behind it. The vault. Its surface was rusted, and the handle resisted his touch as though it hadn't been turned in decades. But with effort and determination, the door creaked open, revealing a hidden chamber steeped in darkness. What Ethan found inside stole his breath. The room was small but meticulously arranged, like a personal shrine. There were velvet-lined shelves containing handwritten letters, vintage photos, perfume bottles, and glass cases of costume jewelry, some clearly valuable, others seemingly sentimental. A black-and-white photo of Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton sat in a golden frame at the center of the back wall. A rose, long dead and crumbling, had been laid beneath it. The air smelled of lavender, dust, and something indescribably old. One particular box, tied with a purple ribbon, sat apart from the rest. Ethan opened it cautiously. Inside were mementos, a locket with a photo of Elizabeth's children, a pair of gloves, and a folded letter dated 1974. The handwriting was unmistakably hers. "If I should go before this ring returns to me, let it not fall into careless hands. It knows my soul, and it knows where I belong." Ethan placed the ring in the box, and for a moment, the air around him seemed to pulse, like the room had exhaled. But something still felt incomplete. The vault, while intimate and sacred, wasn't the destination, it was another clue. That much he was sure of. It was then that he noticed a painting leaning behind one of the shelves. It was a landscape, lavender fields under a golden sky. It didn't match the opulence of the other artifacts. On the back of the frame was a note in faded ink, "My sanctuary in Provence." Peace lived there. That was it. The lavender resting place. It wasn't metaphorical, it was real. Elizabeth had once owned a villa in the south of France, near the lavender fields of Provence. Though she had sold it in the late 80s, it had been her escape from the spotlight, a place of healing during her most turbulent years. Ethan hurried upstairs, researching everything he could find about Elizabeth's time in France. Articles, interviews, letters, all pointed to a property nestled in the Luberon Valley. It was private, secluded, and long since sold. But Ethan didn't care. If that was the place she associated with peace, that was where he would take the ring. Suddenly, the mansion shifted. The lights dimmed. The air grew calm. In the corner of his eye, he saw her again. Elizabeth. Standing in the hallway, watching him, not with sorrow, but with hope. Her eyes locked on his, and for the first time, she smiled. Then she disappeared, leaving behind only the faint sound of distant piano music and the soft meow of the white cat waiting at the foot of the stairs. The message was clear. She was ready. Ethan Hale stood on the balcony of a centuries-old stone villa in Provence, the violet sapphire ring resting in a small, velvet-lined box in his coat pocket. The journey had taken weeks of research, legal inquiries, and travel arrangements, but he had made it. The lavender resting place wasn't a metaphor, after all. It was here, in the golden hills of southern France, where Elizabeth Taylor had once found refuge from the relentless noise of Hollywood. And now, decades later, Ethan had come to fulfill a promise whispered through time. The villa had changed owners over the years, but its spirit remained untouched. The gardens still bloomed with rows of lavender, stretching endlessly into the horizon. The scent drifted through the air like a perfume from another life. Ethan had written to the current owners, explaining he was researching a documentary about classic film stars and their travels in France. He hadn't mentioned the haunting, who would believe him. With the homeowners away for the week, Ethan had been granted access for a single day. The caretaker gave him the keys and, after a brief, puzzled smile, left him alone. Now he stood at the edge of the garden, the wind lightly brushing the tall stalks of lavender. Everything was still. Everything was quiet. Ethan walked slowly toward a circular stone bench tucked under an ancient olive tree. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long, golden shadows. As he sat down, he pulled out the small box and opened it. The ring sparkled, its violet hue more vivid than ever. For a moment, he simply stared at it, his heart full of emotions he couldn't explain. He hadn't known Elizabeth Taylor. He had no personal stake in her life or death. But something in this journey had changed him, deepened his understanding of memory, of legacy, of love that defied time. He placed the ring on the bench, atop a smooth, flat stone that was warm from the sun. Beside it, he laid the final page of the diary, the one where she had written her wish for peace. He didn't speak out loud. He didn't need to. Something about the air told him she was already listening. A gentle breeze passed through the lavender fields, lifting a flurry of petals into the air. They swirled softly around him before settling near the ring. The light shifted. The garden shimmered. Then, she appeared. Elizabeth. Not in shadow this time. Not as a fleeting image in a mirror. But fully, radiantly, beautifully standing among the lavender, dressed in flowing white, her violet eyes reflecting the sunset. She didn't walk. She simply was. And as her gaze met Ethan's, he felt an overwhelming wave of peace wash over him. Not fear. Not sadness. But release. She smiled. It was the smile of a woman who had finally been heard. Ethan didn't move. He didn't blink. He simply watched as Elizabeth stepped forward, her hand reaching toward the ring without touching it. Light burst from the stone, soft, golden, warm. The entire garden glowed for a single moment, like the universe exhaling. Then, as quickly as she had come, Elizabeth faded. Not like a ghost retreating into the shadows, but like a soul rising into the sky, free at last. The wind stilled. The music stopped. And for the first time in weeks, Ethan felt completely alone. But not in a lonely way. She was gone. And she was finally at peace. He sat there in silence for a long while, the lavender swaying gently beside him. He left the ring exactly where it was, covered it with a small glass cloche he had brought, and carved her initials into the stone beneath it. E.T. No dates. No epitaphs. Just those two letters, enough to mark the spot where a legend had been given her final curtain call. As he walked back toward the villa, the white Persian cat was waiting at the gate. It blinked slowly, then turned and disappeared down a path lined with roses. Ethan smiled. He didn't know if he believed in the afterlife before this. But now, he believed in her. Ethan returned to Los Angeles a changed man. The mansion, once alive with restless energy, now stood quiet, serene, even welcoming. It was the same place physically, but the heaviness that once clung to its walls had lifted, as if someone had opened a long-sealed window and let the spirit escape into the wind. The mirrors, once fogged with whispers and imprints, now reflected clearly. The scent of roses no longer lingered in the air. The hallway where he had first seen her was still, peaceful. But most telling of all, the piano had not played since he returned. He knew the haunting was over, not banished, not destroyed, but concluded, like the end of a final scene. Elizabeth Taylor, the Hollywood queen with violet eyes and an indomitable spirit, had said goodbye. And he had witnessed it. Ethan sat in the rose courtyard one morning, flipping through the final pages of the journal. He had decided not to keep it. It didn't belong to him. It was part of her, and though it no longer called out the way it once did, it still held a power, a sacred energy. He would donate it anonymously to the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation, preserved in an archive where it could rest respectfully among her other legacies. The ring, of course, was gone. Left in France. Left where it belonged. Some might say he was foolish for believing in ghosts. Others might think he had simply let his obsession with a Hollywood legend twist his perception. But he knew what he had seen, what he had heard, what he had felt. And the truth was simple: not all stories end at death. A few weeks later, Ethan hosted a quiet dinner at the estate. Just a few close friends and colleagues, people who respected the home's history. As they walked the halls, admiring the decor and photos, one guest paused in front of the grand hallway mirror. "There's something about this place," she said. "It feels watched, but not in a bad way. Like someone's still looking after it." Ethan only smiled. She always had an eye for detail. After the guests left, Ethan wandered through the house alone. He ended up in the sitting room, the same one where the candle had lit itself weeks ago. Now, everything was still. He poured himself a glass of wine and sat by the fireplace. That's when he saw it. A single white rose on the mantel. Fresh. No vase. No tag. Just lying there. He hadn't put it there. No one had. He stared at it for a long time, not afraid, not confused, just moved. It was her way, he knew, of saying thank you. A final token. A farewell. He picked up the rose and held it gently, placing it beside the last page of the diary he kept framed behind glass. The words she had written glowed brighter now with meaning. "Let me be remembered not for the spotlight, but for the love I left behind." He stood and walked to the window, looking out across the quiet property. The stars were out, and somewhere beyond them, he imagined her free from regret, from unfinished vows, from things left unsaid. The haunting had never been malicious. It had been mournful, lonely. A soul not at rest, because a final piece of her had been left behind. And through fate, or something greater, that final piece had found its way home. Ethan turned off the lights, took one last look around the grand old house, and whispered into the night, "Rest now." The house creaked softly as if settling into sleep. Outside, a breeze stirred the roses. And far away, in the lavender hills of Provence, a single violet petal floated into the air, then vanished. The curtain had fallen, and the queen had taken her final bow. 70.